Alright, how's it going, guys? Today we're going to be talking about Jim Benning. Jimothy Benning. Jim Benning is a very polarizing topic in the minds of many Canucks fans, and especially in the minds of many hockey fans that do not pay attention to the Vancouver Canucks. One thing that is very important to take note of is, of course, hockey is a sport, but it is also a business. So to kind of define a GM success is not just about creating a winning team, but from an owner's perspective, it is about creating a great mix of exciting talent and young, youthful talent that obviously leads to more viewership, more ticket sales, more jersey sales, to be obviously a profitable team. So with that being said, it's kind of easy as a fan to say, tank for obviously blank, but tanking really does impact sales. It really hurts revenue and it really discourages a lot of fans. Jim Benning has kind of always walked a very fine line of injecting youth within our lineup, but while, still maintaining a veteran presence. Which is why the Vancouver Canucks have not been obviously a Stanley Cup contending team in 5+ years, but we have never been a last place team. We've been really close, but we still haven't, been last place. So to start this video off, let's break down some of Jim Benning's worst moves, which is why there's a common perception that Jim Benning is a terrible general manager. So to start, let's start with probably the most controversial thing that Jim Benning has ever done, which is sign Loui Eriksson to the 6x6 deal, which has led a lot of people to be very upset. Eriksson, for the most part, has been a very solid player throughout his whole career. The year before Eriksson was signed, he actually put up 30 goals and 63 points. And combined with the belief that his game would be probably further elevated when obviously he got the opportunity to play with the Sedins, who he had played with previously during, Swedish international tournaments. The Canucks management justified the steep price to obviously create a potential very dominant Swedish line. Now in hindsight, of course, this signing is horrendous. Loui isn't necessarily a useless player. I don't think he doesn't deserve to play in the NHL, but of course he is a bottom 6 player at most. So when looking at his contract compared to his, his production, it's terrible. Now, what I will say though is, even though the Vancouver Canucks signed Loui Eriksson to that contract, a lot of teams were offering Eriksson the same amount of money. But Eriksson did want to play with the Sedins, which is why he chose Vancouver. Now, this doesn't justify the signing, but it does make sense why. Obviously, Loui was a good player, and at the time, that was just his market value, and we just had bad luck. Now, there's also another side of the argument where you could say, why did we even sign Loui Eriksson? We weren't a competing team at this point. We should have just started, retooling or something and not go out and sign a big free agent. Now, that's a completely different argument, which I could definitely understand. But guys, keep in mind, there's so much things that go happen behind the scenes, and especially with the Vancouver Canucks ownership, there is way too much, opinions and voices being put in by obviously the ownership of Vancouver than other teams, and Loui Eriksson was probably just a product of that. But keep in mind, guys, one bad signing does not make obviously a general manager a bad GM, just as one good signing does not make him a good GM either. The next is the Jake Virtanen draft pick. Now, Jim Benning was hired not even a month before the 2014 draft, and combined again with a lot of ownership pressure to pick up the local BC boy in Jake Virtanen. And the Canucks scouting department had already established that Virtanen was their guy. This is why they drafted Jake Virtanen. Now, I do have suspicion that Jim Benning didn't want to necessarily draft Jake Virtanen. He wanted to go in another direction. And keep in mind, guys, Jake Virtanen was not an off-the-board pick. In fact, he was expected to go between 5 and 10, so it made sense why we picked him up there anyways. So with that being said, guys, of course, hindsight is 20/20. Of course, we can go, wow, Ehlers was on the board, this guy was on the board, but, that's not necessarily how it works. Virtanen was in that price range, and sometimes you just don't get lucky. The next major piece of criticism is the Beagle and Roussel signings. Now, personally, I have never understood the huge issues with these signings. Time and time again, we are seeing teams, who have great young prospects, but they're missing that veteran presence, and they're missing, that supporting pieces, and it really hurts their development. Beagle and Roussel were never all-stars. They were never going to be players that elevated the Canucks into playoff contention. They were depth signings to help bolster our depth, as well as obviously help develop our younger players. Again, many people act like we went out and signed two of the best free agents on our rebuilding team, and I just personally do not see it that way. Roussel is a fantastic gritty player who has a 120% compete level, and it really does teach younger players to play with the same passion that a guy like Roussel plays with. Beagle is just a solid bottom six center. The Canucks have had a really bad injury history, so it does not hurt to add a solid bottom six defensive piece. Obviously, Beagle was injured, but it made sense at the time. Now, obviously, I do think that their contracts are a bit steep inside. They're a bit slightly overpaid. But again, the Canucks were not a team who had any cap issues, so signing both these guys, it wasn't an issue. And again, a lot of hockey fans treated both these signings like, obviously, Beagle and Roussel, like they wanted to sign these guys to make it back in the playoffs, but more, these guys were just supporting depth players. And the next topic is Jim Benning trades. Now, there hasn't been any, blockbuster trades in terms of major deals. But, of course, I guess the major deal would be the most recent deal, which was JT Miller traded for the first-round pick, conditional first-round pick, and some other pieces. Again, this trade is highly criticized, but in my opinion, it is not a trade that we can necessarily judge yet. If Miller comes into our lineup, provides a good secondary scoring, puts up 50 plus points, 20 plus goals, then I do think this was a good trade. We were really lacking winger depth support, secondary scoring, and JT Miller can really help it. Now again, if he does come in, he puts up 30-40 points, I think that this trade is a flop, but at least that first round pick is protected. Other than that, kind of looking through Jim Benning's whole trade history within Vancouver, there's been many equal trades, if not just light wins. Now, of course, we got guys like Sven Baertschi for a second round pick, which is, in my opinion, a steal. We traded out Burrows and Jannik Hansen for Goldobin and Dawn, which at the time was really good value for some good prospects. We got Granlund for Shinkurik, and Granlund, of course, was a good roster player for a while. And besides this previous draft, the Vancouver Canucks did not really make any, significant trades, besides looking back and looking at the Ryan Kessler trade, but that was just a change of scenery. And this had to do with the fact that we were a rebuilding team. We didn't have a lot of cap issues, and there was no need to trade our guys like, obviously, Edler and Tanev, who made the backbone of our blue line. When I do look back at Jim Benning's trade history, I do see a lot more positives than I do losses, if not just equal trades. Jim Benning really hasn't ever had an issue with asset management, and he's had a pretty keen eye for telling if a player is not going to fit within our lineup or not, besides Louis Eriksson. And the last major impact that Jim Benning has had on the Vancouver Canucks is his drafting. Now, personally, I believe that Jim Benning is one of the better drafters. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of effort to draft well, but more importantly, it takes a lot of luck. Boeser, drafted in 2015, was a major steal. Elias Pettersson, drafted number 5 in 2017, who is now a franchise player, was a major steal. We have other guys like Hughes, Hoglander, Gaudette, Demko, Madden over Jake Wise, Jet Wu, Pak Colson. Benning knows how to draft. I want you guys to imagine what the Vancouver Canucks would look like if we had not drafted, Brock Boeser at number 23. And at number 23, you can get a player that can easily bust. So imagine if we didn't have Boeser, and imagine if Jim Benning went with just say Cody Glass over Elias Pettersson. Just so many things could happen, but he just made the right decisions. So when it comes to choosing the right talent, for the most part, Jim Benning has done a great job. Olio Levy is another controversial pick, but in my opinion, I'm going to stand by my opinion and say that, defensemen take longer to develop. Olio Levy has only just turned 21, and I still do think he has what it takes to obviously turn out to be a solid defenseman. Now, at number 5, obviously you want more than just a solid defenseman, but if Olio Levy comes in and becomes a 30-40 point guy, top 4 defenseman, you can't really complain. In hindsight, you can obviously say, in Olio Levy's draft, Matthew Tkachuk was still on the board, what were you thinking? Or in Jake Virtanen's draft, you could say, obviously, Nikolai Ehlers was on the board. Obviously, guys, hindsight is 2020. Keep in mind, Olio Levy was still a highly touted prospect at the time. And for the most part, even removing Olio Levy and Jake Virtanen, Jim Benning has still had a far better drafting production than, obviously, negative drafting production. And if you guys think back to Mike Gillis and how he completely abolished our prospect pipeline, trading all our picks or just making horrible draft picks within the tail end of every draft, he ignored our farm system and really hurt the development of a lot of young players. And so when Jim Benning came in, he did a lot, and he's honestly done a good job replenishing, obviously, our prospect depth and kind of restoring our farm system. Drafting is arguably the most important task a GM can do, especially when you're a non-playoff team. And for the most part, Jim Benning has hit many home runs. Anyways, guys, that is just my opinion. I think Jim Benning receives a lot more flack than he deserves. And I honestly think that Jim Benning is pretty underrated in terms of a GM. Now, and that has a lot to do with unproven talent. Jim Benning, of course, and the Vancouver Canucks have been a rebuilding team, and we're really unproven still. But when Vancouver Canucks, when all these trades, on all these signings, like Tyler Myers, JT Miller, if the Vancouver Canucks are in the playoffs next season, I think a lot of opinions are going to be changing for Jim Benning. But anyways, guys, let me know what you think about Jim Benning. Personally, I think he's a solid GM. I know, in terms of his drafting, fantastic. In terms of his trades, mediocre. That's basically what you can expect. In terms of his signings, So, there's a lot of people that say, Jim Benning, please just be a drafter, which, would make sense, but that's not necessarily how it's going to work. If the Vancouver Canucks were to ever fire Jim Benning, I would really hope we keep him in our drafting staff. It would only make sense. But anyways, guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think down below. Oh, and by the way, I think what day it was. Last Thursday I went camping, and so if you kind of noticed that I wasn't answering comments or that I was just nowhere to be seen, it was because I was camping. I had no service and I was off the grid, but I am back now. Anyways, guys, see you guys later.